and welcome to Let's Talk Story. I'm author Sarah Crowne, and today I'm sitting down with Robert J. Sodaro, a writer, editor, and journalist whose career spans decades in comics, journalism, and independent publishing. Robert has written for the Comics Journal, Video Gaming Illustrated, and Amazing Heroes. He's created his own independent works like Agent Unknown and Wülf Girlz, and even worked alongside comics legend Stan Lee. He's a storyteller who has lived through the evolution of comics and publishing, and today he's here to share his journey, the breakthroughs, the lessons, and advice he has for fellow creators. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thanks, Sarah. Great to be here. I spent so much of my career interviewing other people that it's always odd for me to be the person being interviewed. But I think I'm used to it by now.
Awesome.
Mhm.
Now, you started out in college radio, media, and early comics journalism. What was the moment you knew storytelling would be your life's work?
Well, I always was a storyteller, honestly. I was telling stories when I was a kid. I was, and I was actually writing when I say short stories, I was writing short 30-page stories when I was a kid, and in high school, and but when I was in college, I joined my local radio station, WSHU, Sacred Heart University in Fairfield, Connecticut, and I met while I was working in radio. I went to work for WICC, which was my first job. I was working as a copywriter and in the traffic department, not traffic on the road, but traffic basically organizing the ads, making sure the ads got in the right spot. That we call that the traffic department as well. And then I bumped around to a couple of different radio stations. I wound up at WNLK in Norwalk, and there I met a guy named Mike Robb. And Mike was friends with the guys over at Fantagraphics. They published the Comics Journal, and they published Amazing Heroes, and they published some other stuff. But so Mike introduced me to Mike Catron, who was the editor at the time. And Mike was, well, what do you like? Well, I obviously like comics. And well, who do you like? Well, I like Stan Lee. I like Stan. I like Steve Ditko.
Mhm.
He's, I got into Steve Ditko was the original artist on Spider-Man. And he said, okay, write an article about Steve Ditko. And I said, okay, fine. So I wrote an article about Steve Ditko. And that was published in Amazing Heroes #5. And I waited for it to come out. And it was a couple of months before it came out. And then it came out, and I went, oh, cool, I'm a published author, or published writer. So let me think of another article to write. And then a few months later, the Fanico Chronicles was publishing hero histories of other Marvel characters, and I contacted them and said, "Hey, I just wrote an article, and here's my, and I have an idea. I'd like to write another article. Well, what would you like? How about an article about John Romita Sr., who was the second major artist on Spider-Man?" And so I basically wrote. So I wrote an article there. So in the first year I was writing, I wrote 2 articles, and I thought that was an amazing thing. 15 years later, I would get up in the morning on a Monday morning and say, okay, what do I want to do? Well, I would call every one of my editors and pitch an article, and 2 or 3 of them would say yes. And then I would write those articles by the end of the week. And then Monday I would start all over again. So I was at one point, I was the most prolific writer, journalist in the field, because I was literally writing for 90% of the comic magazines that were out there. Plus, I was writing marketing and PR material for Marvel, DC, Image, Dark Horse, Valiant, and some other smaller publications.
Mhm.
But to go back to your question, when I knew everything was going to change, I got a job working. I was working for a video game magazine, and I met a guy named Jeff Rovin,
Mhm.
who had worked for Warren, and he'd worked for a couple other companies, and he hired me to write he hired me to write a book about what do you call it, trivia.
Mhm.
So I wrote a trivia. I wrote 1,000 questions, 1,001 questions about trivia, and my association with Jeff kicked me into the stratosphere, and that made me. It just seriously launched me into where I ended up coming out, and working for all those other companies. So that was a really cool thing. And I ran into I worked, I was in touch with Jeff for quite a number of years, and then I lost touch with him. And I ran into him a couple of years ago at New York Comic Con,
Mhm.
and it was actually pretty funny because I was wearing a mask at the time, and he looked over and he saw me and he pointed. He was, "Oh, Bob." And I was like, "Wow, I haven't seen this guy in like 30 years, and he still knows who I am. How cool is that?" But yeah, so Jeff is definitely the was a major kickstarter to my career.
That's really an amazing story. 'Cause it just really shows
Yeah,
how you went from like talent to one connection, plus all your tenacity really opened up doors for you.
it really did. And in 2001, I wrote I had been working for a comic book price guide,
Mhm.
and the editor of that was, he said, we the publisher wants more comic magazines. You have an idea? And I went, well, I want to write an article about fast food toys and collectibles.
Mhm.
Right now there was because I wrote an article about the superhero toys that came out and I had like 10 sets, and I had written an article for one of my editors, and by the time I got it to him, I just I took way too long to write the article. Honestly, he said, "There's no deadline on this." So the worst thing you can say to a freelance writer is, "There's no
No
deadline."
deadline.
Literally a year later, I was like, "Oh, I don't have
Wow.
anything to write today. Oh, wait, if I write that article for Ian, I could get public. I could buy groceries this week." So I
Right.
did. And he said, "Oh, this is a great article. We'll publish it in the next issue." And then a week later, they went, "Oh yeah, we canceled the magazine." And I was like, "What am I going to do with this article?"
Yeah.
That's when my other editor came over and he said he wanted another book, and I said, "You know what? I wrote this article about superhero fast food toys. I bet I could write a whole book about fast food toys."
Mhm.
And he said, "Oh, go ahead." So he pitched it, we sold it, and I did. I wrote this whole Kitty Meal Collectibles.
Mhm.
It came out in 2001, and they put an ad. It was for Krause, who published a Comic Buyer's Guide at the time, and they came out with. They put an ad in some trade publication saying, "We have these authors who have written these books, and they're available for interview." So I got a call from 35 separate uh, um, radio stations
Mhm.
across the country who all said, "Hey, we'd love to talk to you." And I talked to these guys. Matter of fact, one radio station from Vegas used it because I had worked in local media myself. So I pitched to all the local newspapers, and they all wrote an article about me.
Mhm.
One of them was uh, um, it was a sister publication of the LA Times, and the LA Times picked up the article and used it. And then this radio station in Vegas saw the article because they subscribed to it, and they went, "Oh, look!" And they called me, and so I was like, all these radio stations wanted to talk to me about because it was a really fun article. And
Mhm.
then 9/11 happened, and no one wanted a happy talk anymore. So that kind of that was an unexpected consequence of that. But
Mhm.
I still had a bunch of other things I did, and one of the reasons when I was working for Amazing Heroes, we used to do a twice a year preview of what's happening. What's going to happen in your books. So I was talking to Denny Lobert, who was publishing. She was publishing. My brain is it's
Okay.
50. It's 50 years later, and my brain doesn't work anymore. It worked. She was publishing Renegade Press,
Mhm.
and I pitched her a story called Agent Unknown, and it was. I loved spy stuff. I loved agent. I loved James Bond. I loved the TV spy stuff. Cosby and Culp, who
Mhm.
were doing and so I pitched this. I pitched an idea to her about these agents who were doing this stuff,
Mhm.
and she said, "Oh yeah, that's great." So she got Del Barris as the artist, and we got 3 issues out, and then the black and white market crashed. So I was unable to complete the final three issues, but I now have a publisher who's interested in
Right?
picking that up. And Dell, I've reached out to Dell, and Dell's interested in drawing it again.
Mhm.
So I'm really excited about that. I got to get him some scripts. I have a couple sitting in a drawer someplace, and those are coming out. Hopefully, we're going to put that together, and that'll come out soon.
That's awesome. I,
Yeah, yeah. I never let go of anything. I have all these stories from way back when. So, um,
you've
but yeah,
worn so
go
many
ahead.
hats. You've worn so many hats as a journalist, editor, designer, comic creator. Have these different roles influenced your voice as a storyteller?
Yeah, everything. Honestly, actually, I'm going to say it the other way around. My concept of myself as a storyteller
Mhm.
has influenced my all my writing, because all my writing, it's a story. And I started writing 30-second and 60-second radio ad spots. It's a story I'm telling you, because I'm trying to convince you to buy this product.
Right.
When I'm writing an article about a club that I was reviewing, or an event I was reviewing, or a comic, I'm trying to convince you to read this thing. So I'm telling you a story, and I've always kind of saw myself as a storyteller.
Mhm.
So just telling a story, whether it's a journalistic story, or a review story, or a really cool movie I saw, it was always a story that I was telling. And so honestly, I kind of look at it that way.
Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. I mean, stories,
Yeah,
they're in everything. It's
yeah.
really
And, and
amazing.
and then I became a parent, and I told stories to my kids.
Exactly.
So but there's that. But yeah, I kind of, as all the different hats I've worn, I just kind of stumbled from one to another. I didn't intend to become a journalist. I became a journalist because I wanted to get into comics, and that was the
Right.
easiest way to do it.
Mhm.
I didn't mean to go into radio. I was an intern. I was working on my own radio in my college radio station. I got a job at an internship at the local radio station, and what's available? Oh, writing ad. Oh, I can write ads.
Mhm.
And I could do all these, and I just kind of stumbled into these things, and figured out how it all worked, and made it work. I mean, I actually worked in corporate communications as well, doing you know, I actually, the way I got into that was kind of funny too, because I knew a guy who was working. He had his own AV production company,
Mhm.
and he called me up one day, and he said, "What are you doing tomorrow?" And I gave the answer that I usually give when I'm asked that question, and it's the answer that always gets me into trouble. The answer was nothing. What do you need? And
Yeah.
he said, "We're doing a job," and I think it was for Pepsi or GE, and he said, "I need you to come out and help me. We're building slides." And it was back when they were doing it was not digital. It was still analog. It was still actual film. And I said, "Oh, I don't know how to use that program." He said, "No, no, no, I'll teach you." So he taught me how to use a program called Freelance Graphics. Freelance Graphics, as it turns out, was IBM's version of PowerPoint before PowerPoint completely enveloped the market. So I learned how to use Freelance Graphics. And because I did that, I learned I actually got freelance jobs through temp agencies
Mhm.
working for IBM, putting together freelance graphic slides, and then that led to working in PowerPoint, led to working in PageMaker and Quark and InDesign, and I also learned some HTML. I learned a little, so I did a lot of content providing for some websites, and I just did a bunch of whole different things, and everything was kind of cool.
Yeah.
It kind of worked out that way. And about 15 or so years ago, uh, a guy I know who was publishing comic book magazines posted, my guy who's put my magazines together, my designer, he quit, and I need somebody to know how to do that. And I went, "Oh, I know how to do that." And
Right.
so I started Jim Main for Main Enterprises. I started doing his magazines. He did a whole bunch of magazines. I got a whole boatload of magazines that I did for him. And then he was also publishing comics. And at that time, I was like, "Oh, hey, listen, I could write a story. What do you need? Oh, you need a Christmas story? I write a Christmas story. You need a Halloween story? I could write a Halloween story. You need whatever you need." And I started just writing a bunch of comic book stories. So what I did was late when I oh wait, did I have it? Oh yeah, here it is. Um, So recently, he stopped publishing comic books a while back, but he's probably going back into it. And when he does, I'll be doing stuff for him again. But I took all the comic books from him,
Hmm.
all the
Okay.
comic stories I wrote for him, and I put them in my own omnibus.
Hmm.
So I did my design work and I put this together, and this is out on this is on Amazon currently. So that's kind of cool. So I have this because I've also sold all the comic books. The comic there's no more of the original comic books
Hmm.
left. So I
Right.
was but I had art for all of them, so I put them all in this book. So that was kind of a cool thing that I was able to
That
do.
is.
I also and one of the writers that I knew from um, working on Jim's magazine was a guy named Will Murray, and Will Murray writes pulp fiction style fiction. He writes Sherlock Holmes. He writes Tarzan stories. He writes H.P. Lovecraft stories. And I talked to him, and he's putting out books. I said, if you ever need help, he goes, oh yeah, I definitely need help. So now I'm putting out books from
Oh,
H.P. From
nice.
yeah, I'm doing design work on Will's book. And Will's the first person to call me a designer. And I went, oh, well, I'm a designer now. So I
Yes.
get to now add that to my resume. So that was kind of cool. And I've also known and one of the other guys I met recently who lives nearby, his son and my son went to the same high school together, Paul Kupperberg.
Hmm.
And Paul approached me and he said, can you put together books for me too? And I went, okay, sure. So this is one of the books I did for Paul.
That's a
And I've
really
done
cool cover.
a handful of books for him as well,
Mm.
which is a whole lot of fun. This is a really cool book. This is
Yeah.
Ragnarok, JLA Ragnarok,
Hmm.
and it talks about uh, the Earth One characters or the Earth Two or the I don't remember which Earth it is anymore, but one of the characters in here was Mr. Terrific. And that's when I first learned about Mr. Terrific way before the Superman movie. So if you want to learn about Mr. Terrific, go buy Paul's book. It tells all about who he is. So that's kind of a cool thing.
Nice. Now
Yeah.
you have some of your own independent works that you've done over the years too.
I,
Can you share
I,
some of those and what
I,
inspired them?
sure. I did this. And just to go back to the a couple of weeks ago, I went to Jonestown, Pennsylvania, which
Mhm.
is the hometown of Steve Ditko. And
Okay.
Steve, as I mentioned, he's the original artist. So what I did was my first article was about Steve. My second article was about John. I went back. I got those two articles. I recreated them out of the two books that they were originally in, and I printed out a book
Oh,
called
wow.
Remembering Steve Ditko. So this is the first two articles that I wrote about Spider-Man with the
Mhm.
two original artists, and I was selling that at books. So now I have a copy of that I'm bringing around the books.
Nice.
Another one is that I just put together. Um, there's a guy named Gustav Whitehead.
Hmm.
Gustav Whitehead flew 2 years before the Wright brothers and lived in Connecticut, Fairfield, Connecticut,
Oh,
my
wow.
hometown. And I learned about Gustav Whitehead from my science teacher, my high school science teacher, who learned about him and then went around and he built a replica of Gustav's plane and flew it back in
Wow. Oh, that's
1986.
cool.
Oh, it's awesome. He still exhibits it, and in local shows and stuff. So I learned, and when I learned about it, I went, "This is very cool. That would make a really cool comic book." And then it took me 35 years to actually create the comic book. And I created like an 8-page comic book that appeared in a graphic album. And then the album, again, it's no longer in print. So I
Mhm.
said, you know what? This is my story. I took the art and I made it. I made this 8-page comic from Pronto Comics. And I did a couple of comics with Pronto of my own stuff. Well, I took them and I took that story and I did another story. And hold on, that story is here.
Oh, yeah.
That story I put it in this book,
Hmm.
Wings of Man, which is I also produced. I took that story. I took another story I did about the early days of flight in World War One. I wrote a short story about another flyer in back that took place in after World War One, and I wrote a version of the Icarus story that it made it more humanized, and I took all of those 4 stories and I put them together into this comic book. That was but the cool thing is this is the one. This is called Wolf
Yeah.
Girls. All right. This is the this is the comic. It's taken me 20 years to get this thing into print.
Wow.
Darkfire Press is J.M. DeSantis is the
Mhm.
publisher, and I have I took three short stories and two vignettes, and I put them together into this story. I had them colored. They originally all published in black and white. They're
Mhm.
now in color, and the Girls is a story about two underage sisters who are werewolves that hunt pedophiles.
Oh, I love the concept.
And it has nothing to do with anything that's going on politically or in this country or at the moment. I just need
Right, right.
I always feel I need to say that I'm not
Uh,
capitalizing on
sure.
this is 20 years ago.
Yeah.
The original story was the the uh, uh, the the trigger for the story was I was told to write a story that frightened me in the 21st century.
Mhm.
And when my daughter was 3 years old, she's 30, she'll be 31 this year. When
Mhm.
she was 3 years old, she wandered away from me in a shopping mall. She
Mhm.
followed her mother across a crowded food court without her mother noticing and without me knowing that she walked away.
Oh gosh.
Wigged me completely out.
Yeah.
It was literally the scariest 5 moments of my life, 5 minutes of my life.
Yeah.
And all I could think of was I now have to explain to my mother that I lost her granddaughter. And
Right.
I didn't know what to do. I called security. They showed up. What's she wearing? I have no idea. Where she go? I don't know. I'm not. I got
The
nothing.
panic.
I'm
Right.
losing. Yes, I'm literally losing my mind. And when her mother comes back across the food court, the crowd opened up, and I saw my daughter walking next to her. And oh my God,
Gosh.
it
Yeah.
was such a good moment at right then. And so I was so losing my daughter was terrifying to me,
Mhm.
and I wanted to take away this terrifying element of that.
Mhm.
So I empowered her by making her aware, not making her a werewolf, but making these two
He's
young girls werewolves
Mhm.
who they weren't being stalked by the pedophile, they were hunting them.
Right.
So I wrote the first story, and you didn't know who they were. They just the story until you didn't know until the last couple of pages that, oh, by the way, we're werewolves and we're going to eat you.
Mm.
So they did, and I showed it to uh, uh, the artist, and he said, "Oh, this is a great story. What's the next one like?" And I said, "There is no next one because you know the story. You know it was a trick to get you there, and now you know the trick. And I can't tell that. I can't keep telling it that way."
Mhm.
And he said, "No, no, you got to tell me." And finally, I was like, "Oh yeah, you know what? Um, we kind of sat down and figured out how to turn
Mhm.
to write that original story." And then I said, "Oh, now we have to write a story about how they went from werewolves to werewolves that hunt pedophiles."
Mhm.
So, and then we have there, and he said, "A graphic novel." I said, "No, we have a movie."
Right.
And
Absolutely.
yeah, and actually, I was just talking to somebody a couple of weeks ago who might be interested in actually making a movie.
Right.
I'm not holding my breath waiting for that to happen, but it was kind of a cool
Yeah.
conversation to have.
That's
So yeah,
cool.
there's that. And one of the other books that I did is this. It's called Writers Unite: Dimensions of Superheroes. This was also available on Amazon. I belong to a writers group on Facebook,
Mhm.
and we've written they've the group has written like 5 or 6 books. I've been part of it. This is my fourth book with them. We did a Western, we did a fantasy story, and a romance story. And then we had the superhero story that we were going to do. And it was supposed to come out in 2023, only it didn't because there was just some issues that came up, and I'm not quite sure, and I don't want to malign anybody in it, but it didn't come out, and the editor was like, "Oh, we're going to cancel." I said, "No, no, no. I actually design books so I could put
Yeah.
this together." And she said, "Oh, okay, fine." And she turned everything over to me, and I got all the writers together, and I grabbed some artists to put artwork in there as well. And then I went and I recruited Paul Kupperberg,
Mhm.
um, Gary Kahn, both of whom who worked for DC,
Mhm.
and Will Murray, who worked for Marvel, and uh, Dave No is a part of the group. He works for Indelible Comics, and
Mhm.
I do some work for Indelible as well. And then T.C. Ford, who publishes United Comics, and he worked for Charlton before it completely disappeared. And so I got you know and honestly, I got Gary, Paul, and Will because they have way bigger names in the field than all the rest of us put together. So I was hoping that by adding them in, they would write some really cool stories, which they did.
Right.
They wrote amazing stories, and hopefully that will help elevate the level of this book.
Sure.
So yeah.
I read your fantasy story, and
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry I can't remember the title of it right now, but I loved it. It was a snow globe.
Oh no. Oh, that was no. That story was a 500 word flash fiction story.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, that was for this book. Um, Weird Fiction Quarterly. This
Yeah.
one is Kings in Yellow. It's a H.P. Lovecraft adjacent story. That one, yeah, the snow globe story was the purpose of that was to do a 500 word flash fiction story with kind of a surprise ending to it,
Yes.
and
It's such
that
a
was one of my
surprise ending.
yeah that was one of my favorite stories to write
Yes.
for
It
Weird
was
Fiction Quarterly.
fantastic. And I mean, and to be
Thanks.
able to do that in 500 words and then have that feeling at the end, I don't want to give it away, but that surprise ending at the end was like, wow, that's really
Yeah, I know. That was again, I'm going to go back to my writing ads,
right.
30-second, 60-second ads.
Mhm.
That's sort of the way I'm viewing it, that I can put these things together. And sometimes I get it right on the nose. Sometimes I get it just a couple of words over and I can trim it. A couple of times I did it. I was like 600 words and I had to cut 100. And it's painful to cut some of the words out because
Yeah.
I'm brilliant. And I know it was,
It's hard. And people
yeah,
don't realize how hard it is to write something in so few words like that.
right. Yeah, it's like I know exactly how I'm going to do this, and I'm a brilliant writer. And as the editor, I'm going, wow, that guy just using way too many words. What's
Yeah.
he doing?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's fun.
So you also had the opportunity to work with Stan Lee. What was that experience like and what did
Well,
you take away from it?
yeah, truth to tell, I met Stan first time in when I was in college. I was working at a radio station. I did a radio rock opera, a
Mhm.
comic book rock opera, and the guy I was working with said, "Well, we should go in and talk to Stan." And I was like, "Stan's not going to talk to us. He doesn't know who we are." And he went, "Oh no, no, Stan loves guys talking in college. He'll talk to us." So he called up, and we holy smokes, we got an interview with Stan,
Wow.
and we got an interview with Jim Shooter, who became the an editor in chief of over at Marvel, and John Romita Jr. As well. So so I got a chance to interview him. I got a picture taken with him. That's someplace in a storage unit, someplace. Um, but honestly, on this book, it was Stan Lee's How to Draw Superheroes. There were 4 books. The first two, none of I hate to reveal this, but none of the books were actually written by Stan.
Okay.
The first one was written by a friend of mine, Dave Campetti. The second one was written by somebody else. The third and fourth ones were written by myself and a bunch and some other guys. We were all just hired to write books
Mhm.
on this, and you know what? The high point of it was I got to write in Stan's voice because
Right.
I've been reading Stan my whole life, and I got to write as Stan's voice. So that was like an amazingly cool thing for me to do. I was so happy to do it. It was such a great thing.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
My son actually got the opportunity to meet him just before he passed away, and he was like just so nice, you
Oh
know.
yeah, I met him a couple of times over the years. Yeah, I
Yeah,
met him a couple of times over the years. He was always very pleasant, very nice, very wonderful. He was, you know, I'm a huge Stan Lee fan. I really am.
yes.
Yeah, he forgot things. He sometimes didn't remember who did work, and
Mhm.
but you know what? I still don't care.
Yeah,
He's the face of comic books. He
exactly.
launched them. He launched them up and made them not just kids
Mhm.
books, but he worked with amazing storytellers. They weren't just artists, and that was the main difference between the Silver Age of Marvel with Stan and basically everything that's come after it.
Right.
Not everybody's a storyteller.
Yeah.
There are a lot of really good artists who are storytellers, but some of them are just artists, and nothing, no disrespect to them. And I shouldn't have used the word just artists, but they're artists,
Right.
and they're telling stories. But Stan could say, Fantastic Four fight Doctor Doom, and Jack could go off and draw a whole book and
Mhm.
come back and say, "Here it is," and then Stan would dialogue it, and that was just amazing stuff. you
Right.
know?
Exactly. That collaboration together really made those stories. You
Yeah. I got into comics. My uncle owned a small mom and pop grocery store,
know?
and mom would be there. My father used to work there part time. I would sit on a newsstand and read comic books.
Yeah.
And I read without buying them, I read all these comic books from the Silver Age, Marvels, DC, Charlton, everything that was out there. It didn't matter to me. Little Dot, Little Lulu, it doesn't matter. Charlton books,
Hmm.
you know, Harvey books, didn't matter. And because 12 cents was a lot of money back then.
Yes.
I probably
Don't you
read
wish
a
you
couple of,
had some of those comics now, though?
yeah, I
Right.
really do. I actually, for a time, I actually owned I went back, I bought a bunch of Marvel comics. I had a run of Spider-Man books from Amazing Fantasy 15 to issue number 700 complete.
Nice.
And then I sold most of them. So,
Wow.
but you know what? It's okay. I still have my comics, and that is ultimately more important to me these days. You know,
Absolutely.
I don't have a place to store them either anymore.
That's the hard part, is storing them everywhere.
Yeah.
And they have to be
Hmm.
stored a certain way so that, they don't get
Oh
destroyed and all of that stuff.
God, I was probably 40 by the time I actually board and bagged my comic books from
Yeah.
over the years. I didn't, I just didn't. I just put them in books, put them in boxes, and kept them in a dry spot.
Right, right.
Yeah. So
So, as someone who's moved between mainstream comics and independent publishing, what advice would you give to writers trying to find their voice today?
tell a story. Tell a good story. You got to. It's all about telling a story. You just have to, you know, and my friend TC, he's running. As I said, he's running United Comics, and he's always looking for people to tell 8 and 10 page stories.
Mhm.
And most of the people that come to him go, "Oh no, I can't write. This is a 50 issue comic book of 35 pages, 36 pages a piece, and I got to tell this whole story." And I'll tell them the same thing that TC tells them. No, no, you're not. You're just not going to write a story that's because it takes too long to write it. Your audience is not going to stay with you. You're not going to have an artist to stay with. It's not going to happen. You have to learn how to tell short stories.
Right.
I grew up reading 8 and 10 page stories. They were amazing. And it's a completely, if you can completely tell a story, carve it down to just the core elements of what's necessary for the story, then you can tell a story. And you can tell stories and you can tell sequential stories but make each story its own, its own story. Each
Right.
issue. Some of as an editor of comics, there are certain things you have to know. 6 panels per page, 8 panels maybe. I mean, if you're if you're somebody's Ditko could do 12 panels too, or the other artists could do multiple panels art and do. They don't have to be in a straight grid, but when you're starting out, you're not Jack Kirby. You're
Right.
not Steve Ditko. You're not John Romita
Start
Sr.
somewhere.
You got to start in the beginning. So, 6 panels per page, 35 words per panel. You
Mhm.
know, uh, back and forth dialogue a couple of times. You can't, I read scripts. Joe walked into the kitchen. He walked across the kitchen. He opened the refrigerator door. He grabbed the cup, orange juice. He grabbed the cup from the cabinet. He poured himself orange juice and he drank it. That's panel one. No, that's not panel one. That's the first page. That's the first two
Right.
pages. There's no movement in any of these things.
Mhm.
It's a static shot. Every page should be a complete scene. When you turn the page, you're in a new scene. You want to keep everything flowing. You want to have a reason for the reader to read the next page, to turn the page and go to the next page. And these are the kinds of things you have to pay attention to. You know,
Mhm. You really
so
need to visualize it like a movie, right?
exactly. But again, static moments of a movie. It's like you're walking through and just taking snapshots of what's happening. They do storyboards for movies.
Yeah.
They do the same thing. They write the script, they draw a storyboard, and now the camera guy knows how to shoot the scene. I mean,
Right.
yes, and you'll change it and stuff. I mean,
Sure.
I when I was writing Agent Unknown, uh, um, the I wrote some panels, and then Dell added stuff to the panels because I didn't, I had a guy jumping over a barn in a motorcycle. Well, Dell put a board leaning up against the barn so he could drive up and drive over. Oh yeah, that's right. He's going to have to do that. I forgot about that.
Mhm.
And in another story I wrote, the the story took place in LAX,
Mhm.
and the artist was like, "Yeah, I had to watch Airplane." The airplane movie like 10 times to see what LAX looked like. And I was like, oh, didn't even occur to me. I could have written that taking place on the far side of the moon and didn't even imagine what it would have looked like, you
Yeah.
know? So yeah, you have to kind of think about these things and how you can it's easier now to get those kinds of backdrops to you can Google what does LAX look like,
Sure.
you
Yeah.
know?
You look
So
on Pinterest or something, find
yeah,
other things.
and I've actually done that when I've tried to organize.
I have too.
I wrote a story where I was talking about a paramilitary operation, and I was trying to figure out what kind of guns they would carry and what kind of weapons they would use and what kind of. And I googled all of it, and at the end of it, I went, "Oh, I'm probably on some FBI website
Right.
now because I'm."
Yeah, what you're looking up. I totally hear you. You're like, no, don't worry
Yeah,
about me. I'm just a writer.
not the best idea I ever had, but
Yeah.
it worked out. The story was pretty good.
So
So.
you've had quite a career, and as you know, being an artist, whether that's a writer or an artist or whatever art form
Mhm.
you're creating, can have a lot of ups and downs. And how do you personally handle the ups and downs of the creative life, whether that be rejection, or just slow progress, or a project didn't land the way you hoped, which is just so common. I mean, as you know,
Yeah,
artists, we're creating things, we're putting it out there. Sometimes it hits, sometimes it doesn't, or you're trying to work through a story that's difficult.
Yeah, I've been pretty lucky in the regard that I mean I pitched a bunch of stuff to Marvel that never got picked, never got interest, no one ever was interested in. I pitched a story, didn't happen. I pitched it, retooled it, pitched it again to another editor,
Mhm.
didn't happen. And then I took the story and I changed all the characters into independent characters and wrote it again. And that time it got published because I didn't have to worry about
Mhm.
and the marketing on all of that. So hanging on to stories and always be willing to retool them and rewrite them. That's one thing. My I also, like I said, I spent a goodly part of my professional writing life as a journalist. So, you know, pitching an article that an editor didn't like, no problem. I'll just pitch you another one. It wasn't such a big deal. Pitching a story, a concept that didn't fly, little tougher, but also I have two children
Mhm.
and I was raising my children. So my a lot of my intention was to raise my children, and I didn't, and it was okay. I didn't think I always saw myself as being a comic book adjacent
Mhm.
more so than being in the industry. But I went to shows. I knew the people in the industry. I got to hang out with some of these guys. I got to go to shows. It was all good. I really enjoyed doing those things,
Mhm.
and it's fine. And now I'm at a point. I'm 70 years old. I
Mhm.
care a lot less about whether or not the thing is good because I now can publish my own books, and I'm doing that, so I feel even better about it. I still have there's half a dozen or so independent comic books
Mhm.
publishers that I work with. They're mostly friends of mine. I like as much as I like corporate comics.
Mhm.
I don't spend as much. I don't read as much corporate comics as I used to back in the 70s and 80s or when I was a kid and sitting in my uncle's store. But I really like independent comics. I absolutely adore independent comics because these are comic books that are being written, produced by my friends. I
Sure.
love these guys. And I don't, and it's better because I don't know what's going to happen.
Mhm.
They're not uh, um, controlled by a corporate company saying, "Oh
Right.
no, you can't have that happen."
Mhm.
I can do whatever I want. They're my characters,
Exactly.
and I really like that. And I spend a lot of time supporting books on Kickstarter and you know, like that. So
Yeah.
that's a lot of fun for me.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's so much wonderful independent work out there. It's
Mhm.
really amazing to see all the creativity and the stories. And like you said, the writer in that situation can really control it creatively. So
Ab-
it makes for very
abs-
interesting stories.
yeah, and every once in a while I run into somebody who's produced a comic book, and I'll go, you know, I'm going to buy your comic book, and I'm going to tell you something. Here's a trick that you need to fix. Happened to me on one of my comic books. The letterer on one of my comics lettered it, but comic book artwork is 1.5 to 2 times the size of the actual page of the comic.
Mhm.
So she lettered it, but she lettered it digitally, and probably lettered it at you know 12 point, and then it shrunk down, so now it's like 9 point, and I found it really difficult to read, so I had to get somebody else to actually letter it,
Mhm.
reletter it up. So I've seen a couple of comics where I'm reading it, I'm going, I get that I'm older than you, and my eyesight isn't as good as it used to be, but you got to make sure you letter it better. You got to,
Absolutely.
yeah, you got to be aware of these kinds of things.
Mhm.
And one guy was like, he was a novice, and he went, "Oh, I didn't even think of that." And another time I saw it, he said he thought I was picking on him. I said, "No, look at it; it's too small." He went,
Right.
"Oh yeah, you're right. How about that?" Yeah.
Yeah. There's so
Um,
much to consider, especially as an independent
mm,
creator, because you're doing everything. You're
yeah.
doing the story, you're doing the drawing, you're putting all the production together, the marketing, it's
Yeah, and
wearing a lot of hats.
as a writer who's not an artist, it's difficult for me to sometimes connect with artists who,
Right.
you know,
Your vision.
actually finish the work.
Sure.
Sometimes they get distracted, and I don't want to again malign it. Most all the artists I've worked with, really all the artists I've worked with, have been really good about
Mhm.
they finish the work. Sometimes it takes longer than other times.
Mhm.
There's one guy I worked with. I he wanted to work with me. I wanted to work with him, and I pitched a story specific to his strength as a writer. I'm sorry, as an artist.
Mhm.
And I said, take your time. I don't
Right.
care. And he just took his time, and it took him a little over a year to get it done. And he was like, "Oh, listen, I'm sorry. No, 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 don't apologize. I
Right.
want you to do this. I absolutely love your work. You
Mhm.
need to finish this." And he had such a different style than what normally goes for in comics. And it was just such a good book for me.
Do you have any dream projects or an unwritten story that keeps you excited or up at night that you're like, I really want to write this or work on this, but I haven't yet?
Well, yeah, it's the next issue of Wolf Girls.
Okay.
I have about a dozen stories of the Wolf Girls that I want to continue. I'm looking for an artist. My original two artists, um, yeah, I'm still friends with them. One of them's just stopped working in the industry. The other one is working, but he's working on his own projects, and it's great. I'm still really good friends with him. Matt C. Ryan, he's such an amazing artist. He's doing a comic book now called Brenda. It's about a barbarian girl who's, I don't know, she's probably 10 years, 15 years old, maybe. And he's a huge Conan the Barbarian story. So he's basically writing Conan, but as a 10-year-old girl.
Oh, wow.
And it's absolutely wonderfully amazing. It's really one of the coolest books that I love. Every time I see him at a show, what do you got that's new? A new one? I'll buy that one because it's such a cool book. Um, but so yeah, I'd like to do more Wolf Girl stuff. I definitely want to do Agent Unknown. I got a bunch of Agent Unknown stories I want to put out that's been sticking in my head for quite a long time,
Mhm.
and and then just other stories. I just want to keep writing, because sometimes, a lot of times, the stories I wrote, a lot of the stories that for Weird Fiction Quarterly and for Jim Main, it's, here's a story, here's your idea, here's your writing prompt, and I go, okay, and I'm going to do that, you know,
Right.
and I'll write that story, and and now I got especially the romance story I did for Writers Fiction, for Writers Unite. I did that story. I actually wrote two romance stories,
Mhm.
and and even though the romance stories is really so far outside of my wheelhouse, I got 3 or 4 more romance stories that are in my head now, and I'd like to write them. And what I'll end up doing is I'll put them all together and put them in my own book, and
Right.
so like that. So yeah,
I
but
love
there's
that.
yeah, it's and again, I keep every once in a while I run into other writers who don't have a book. I mean, I put together comic books for a bunch of different people
Mhm.
because they can draw, they can produce all the art, but they don't know how to compile it all together
Right.
and publish it. And my first the 2 books the last 4 books that I put together literally in the last couple of months, I put 2 of them out through KDP, which is Amazon, and 2 of them through Comics Wellspring.
Mhm.
And it was, even though I've been doing this stuff for quite a long time, working with both of those companies was a bit of a learning curve for me to how to get it out there, how to get it up, how to properly upload it
Yes.
and look at it. And that's a trick in and of itself.
Mhm.
It's so it's not it's not and none of this is I'm going to publish a book, I'm going to put it on Amazon, and now I'm going to be Stephen King.
You're right.
No, no, you're not. You're
Doesn't
not
work that way.
because first of all, he was working with a publisher who's going to do all his marketing promotion, and
Sure.
second of all, you're not, and you have to do it yourself. So whenever I publish a book, whenever my work is in a book, I acquire extra copies of the book, and I go to comic book shows like where I
Mhm.
met you,
Yes.
and I sell them at the show,
Mhm.
and stand around and talk to people, and
Mhm.
and you stand around, you talk to people, and you tell them all about your book, and they go, "Oh, that's really cool. Good luck with that." And then they walk away, and you go,
I congratulate
"No, you don't understand. The
you.
way I'm getting luck is if you actually buy one of these
You're
things."
right, exactly.
So, but that's funny. And it's like you always want, and I always have it in my head where I go, and that's when I stabbed them, Your Honor.
It's so
No, no, there's no stabbing.
I understand though as a fellow writer. I absolutely I love doing shows because I feel like I love talking with people and being
Oh,
share the story with them. Sometimes on the internet it just feels like you're lost in this dark abyss, this just abyss of you just feel like you're not going anywhere, or you're getting past a firewall, or people finding it. And when you're at a show, you get to talk to them. But I've definitely been in your situation where
exactly.
they mean well, but
And being in that great big dark hole where you're actually creating your next book, and I'm sitting here, and right now I'm sitting here in my cubby hole here, work talking to you, but before that I was working on the next thing I'm doing, and meanwhile Martha is sitting over there someplace going, I know where the hell Bob is. Okay. And he's been home all day. I haven't seen him,
yeah,
and I have to get up and go, oh yeah, that's right. I have to get up and go talk to Martha and hang out and sit in front of the TV and do
right,
something with her.
exactly.
And then and I wear a smartwatch, and my smartwatch has started mocking me because the other day I'm sitting here and it beeps at me, and I look at it and it goes, "You haven't moved in quite a while. Maybe you should get up
Right.
and walk around." I'm like, really, really?
I know. Oh, it's the life of a writer. I
Yeah.
completely.
Yeah, the robot rebellion is happening. But yeah, I like going to the shows, and I like talking to people. Even when you don't buy, because sometimes I have these really great conversations explaining what my motivation is and why I'm doing what I'm doing and what the story behind this is. And as I said, I went a couple of weeks ago to Johnstown, and I was talking to the people over there, and it's a brand new market for me, and I'm going to go back to they're doing another show in not next year but the year after, but I got to meet Steve's nephews and nieces and cousins, and oh my God, telling and there was a little museum over there, and I was
Oh,
just
wow.
to see this stuff.
Yeah.
It was stunning, and to talk to these people, and they were, yeah, Steve used to, Uncle Steve used to come here and used to cook on the grill during cookouts, and when we were kids, he would play Play-Doh with us, and I was like, wow, having a somebody a name person like that, even though Steve shunned the spotlight so much
Yeah.
in his life, but that's just such a cool thing to be related to someone like that,
Yeah, absolutely.
and then talking to his relatives was also a very very cool moment for me. So
Yeah.
really enjoyed that stuff.
That's amazing. I would
Mhm.
love that too. I love touring like different historic author homes. And so it kind of reminds me of that. And to be able to actually talk to relatives, it's, you get the
Yeah.
stories behind, uh,
Mhm.
behind the person, behind the creator. So
Mhm.
before we wrap up, can you tell us what's next for you? Where can people find your work if they wanted to take a dive in?
Oh gosh, I'm all over social media. I have when I write, actually, I just posted an article that I wrote about a graphic novel that came out recently called Napoleon's Starship. It was published by Wayward Raven,
Mhm.
and it was imagined as if Napoleon not only conquered all of Europe, but then he had access to modern day technology and conquered the stars. And they
Oh,
took it out there, and I was like, okay, that was very funny, and I
wow.
rather enjoyed it. And it was, like I said, it was published by Wayward Raven. But I'm all over social media. I decided to publish a great big swath on social media. I'm on Facebook. I have my own blog. It's freelanceinc.blogspot.com.
Mhm.
Um, I let's see. I'm looking at it now. I have a page on Reddit. I have Pinterest, Tumblr. Um, what is this? This is LinkedIn.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I'm also on Blue Sky and
Mhm.
Threads and Mastodon. I just every time I find a new social media, I go onto it, and if it doesn't pan out, if nothing seems to happen, man, I dropped a couple of them. I dropped Twitter because it became a hellscape, and
Right.
I couldn't stand it there anymore, so I walked away from it. But I got to tell you, I'm really happy that I was bugging um, Kickstarter. Kickstarter used to you could post, you know, I on Facebook and you could post on Twitter. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not on Twitter anymore. There are a lot of people on Twitter.
Right.
You got to pick. So they now have now you can post directly to Blue Sky.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, so there's a couple.
Drop.
I think they should go other places as well to make it easier.
Hmm.
But you know, let them go where they want to go. So,
Yes,
mhm,
absolutely.
mhm.
Well, thank
So
you so much. It's been so great having you here today. And it's just your career really shows us that, writing is not just about words on the page, but it's really that persistence, right? And
mhm.
tenacity. I hear that from your story and all of the passion that you have in creating all the work that you've done and continue to do. So I really, it's been
Yeah.
such a pleasure talking with you.
Well, thank you. The guy I buy my comics from, the local store, he said to me one time, you're different than most guys. Most people are into comics just for a few years. You've been you like comic books 10 years ago, 20 years, 30, 40, 50 years. You like comic books. And I do. I like comic. I picked up a bunch of I've done all kinds of reading of all kinds of comic books of all kind of publishers. And I really just love comic books. It's something that stayed with me my whole life. I've been writing professionally for over 50 years,
Mhm.
and I've been reading comic books, you know, almost most of that time. Probably about 40 years I've been reading comic books. But
Wow.
yeah, I'm going to keep reading it as long as they're publishing them, and as long as I can afford to keep going.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And I think that's what it's really all about, right? It's about loving the
Yep,
story and just keep going, keep writing, keep creating.
yep, absolutely. And it's persistence. It really is. It's not just not just I did something and now I'm done. No,
Mhm.
you know, do it. Keep doing it. You know,
Exactly.
all right.
Well,
Thank you.
thanks
Thank
again,
you for interviewing.
Tom. And
Mhm.
until next time, I'm Sarah Crowne, and this has been Robert J. Sodaro, and we've been talking on Let's Talk Story, and I hope to talk to you again.
I'm looking forward to seeing you at another show.